All right, well, we've been going through the Vivekachudamani, the Crest Jewel of Discrimination, which is a work on Advaita Vedanta. Are you familiar at all, John, with any of with Vedanta or with the ideas of oneness?
Not exactly. I don't know, it's a philosophy.
All right, sure. The Vivekachudamani is a treatise written by Sankaracharya, and basically it posits that this world, well, the nature of this world is one without a second, that there's not a multiplicity, that there's a singularity behind it all, and that this multiplicity is a projection of wrong thinking. So because, this is a good challenge, so because we identify ourselves with a body and a mind, we assume that similar appearing things around us are also bodies and minds, and we assume that's the nature of things. But in reality, we find out that it's like someone who is sleeping, who is dreaming. In their dream, they see a multiplicity, they see a whole universe, but in fact, there's only one dreamer. And they are all projections of that one dreamer and are of the same nature as that one dreamer. And so the sages have had the experience that this world is very similar in that nature, that there is only one being, one existent self, whose nature is Satchit Ananda, existence, knowledge, and bliss, absolute. And that the life in us is a manifestation of that one being within each of us. And because that being is beyond attribute, that is outside of time, space, and causation. Time, space, and causation belongs to the dream and not to the dreamer in this case. And so this one dreamer manifesting many times, we have begun to believe in the dream and believe that the dream is the reality. When in fact it is just a projection of that reality. It's of the same nature as the dreamer, but it's not the dreamer himself. And so in this treatise he tries to set up why that's true, how they found that to be true, and what steps and processes we as seekers need to go through in order to discover that same truth. So it comes around to Vedanta is sort of an expression of that. That's the ultimate truth of Vedanta. Vedanta means the end of the Vedas, or the culmination of the Vedas. It's kind of the cream of the thousands of years of spiritual practice that people have done. And the Vedas say that this is the ultimate outcome, but that based on your level of consciousness as a person, how much you've developed your idea of self, you can see the world in different ways from different vantage points of perspective. So there are also schools of duality that say that God is in fact separate and apart from us, and we will never be the same as God or never merge with God, that there will always be a difference. That's the school of duality, or Dvaita. Then there's the school of qualified non-duality, which says that there really is one being, but we're all separate entities within that one being. So we're part of a greater whole, but we still exist separately as individuals within that whole. And then there's the Advaitists that say, well, the highest realization is that in fact there's no boundary at all, that we have imagined and projected this reality, and it has no inherent existence belonging to itself, that its existence depends on our existence. So I'm sure that's a lot clearer now. So we'll jump into it. We started off in the first portion of the book. He basically talks about how fortunate it is in our sequence of births in this reality to come to a place where, one, we're interested in finding out the truth, that two, we have a nagging idea that something's up with this reality, something's going on, and so we're curious about it, and that we have the time to study it, that we have the tools to study it, that we have teachers to learn it from, and that we have the scriptures to learn it from. So they're talking about, he starts the book off by pointing out how fortunate and lucky we are to have all of these things in the same room at the same time, and how foolish it would be not to take advantage of that. So that's the first part of the book. Then the second part that we got finished with a couple weeks ago, they talked about that it's this truth that the sages have stumbled upon cannot be had by any process. So it's the only effect that has no cause. So it's not a composite of understanding. It's kind of outside the realm of composites. And the reason that it's not the result of any process or of any cause is because it always is. The way they explain that is like if you walk into a dark room and there's a rope laying on the ground and you imagine that that rope is a snake. You project that idea of snake onto that rope and you act in fear and you're afraid of it. What causes the snake to go away? Well, nothing causes the snake to go away because the snake is not there, never was there. Even if you saw it and projected it and were afraid of it and acted accordingly, nothing that you do actually makes the snake go away. What happens is that the obvious becomes evident, that it's just a piece of rope laying on the floor. And so the scriptures are telling us that this understanding, this enlightenment, this realization that occurs in someone's life is not the result of works or tasks or any number of things to get there, because it's already there, it's already apparent, and all that is undone is an ignorance about what is. It gets a little challenging because it's a purely subjective experience. There is no way to bring someone into your space to see what you have realized. So the teachers talk about it, and it gets very confusing when they start talking about it because it's super sensual. It doesn't exist within time, space, and causation, and it's not something that the mind can comprehend. Because mind requires three components. It always requires subject, object, and relationship between the two. In order to comprehend something, it always has to have that triad. And this singularity that's experienced, that triad collapses into one. And so without those three pieces, the mind can't conceive, can't understand. Also, the second difficulty, as if that's not difficult enough, is that this realization is not an experience, because there is no experiencer. It's one without a second. So the realization is not, you're not looking at something or seeing something or feeling something or thinking something or experiencing something, that you are everything. But you can't say it that way. That's why they call it Advaita. You can't say I am everything, because that implies an I who's separate and apart from everything, that's identified with everything. But in Advaita there is actually one without a second, so there is no other. There is no experience involved. It's impossible to talk about because it's transcendent. It's because it is not of mind. So that's we're going to touch on that a little bit today, actually. And then the last time I was down, and we talked about this class, we talked about how this work can only be done by a person. Only you can come to this understanding. Nobody can give it to you or produce it for you or demonstrate it to you. That the only way to see this or to understand this is to do it yourself, to come to an understanding, or for the sake of language, we'll just say that. You have to come to your own understanding. You have to do it yourself, because it is a purely subjective experience. Because the ultimate truth is that there's no one to show it to. So like in a dream, if you're in a dream and you come to the notion that you're the dreamer, because think about it, it's rather odd in a dream. If you're in a room full of people in your dream, in your dream, you're still identifying with only one person in that party, even though in the dream everything is your own mind, everything is being projected by your own self. You still, just by nature, choose a particular perspective, a particular person in that dream to identify with as being you, even though in fact you are the whole dreamer. And so we look at everyone in the dream and we assume that they also are particular people in the dream, even though it's the dreamer who's animating them as well. But we don't think of the dreamer doing that. We believe ourselves to only be this one person of many. We don't understand, even while we're dreaming, that everybody in the room in the dream is the same dreamer manifesting through a different mind and through a different body, like a prism. So you have a light. The way the scriptures talk about it is, if you've got 100 pots of water on the floor and you've got the sun shining, you look down in the 100 pots, you're going to see 100 suns reflecting in the water of 100 pots. But there's only one sun. But each reflected sun is a complete sun. It's got all the pieces there. But it's just a reflection of an implied sun. The sun that's somewhere else. And so with that introduction, we'll jump in. Did that make any sense at all to everybody? Is that getting us there anywhere? Anyway, the ways of coming to this understanding, of coming to this realization of who we are and what we are, is a process known as yoga. And religion is, in general, different forms of that yoga. Vedanta doesn't care what religion you choose. They believe that all religions lead to this realization. And it doesn't even have to be religion. There's no requirement for believing in God.
Like me.
What's that?
Like me.
Yes. Yeah, there's no requirement within Vedanta. Which is something very interesting about Vedanta, is there's no necessary belief system. You don't have to believe or have faith in anything except for yourself, that you believe that there is an answer to this and you're interested in finding out what it is, and that you're earnest and sincere about that investigation. That's really the only requirement of Vedanta, is that you really want to know what's going on. And Vedanta tells you the outcome, because that's what most people want to know, like, what is this? But all of the tools of Vedanta, all of the instructions of Vedanta are not about the goal, but about what is the process for allowing this realization to occur within yourself, so that you can see these things for yourself. So a Vedantist will not say, this is what is true. A Vedantist will say, here's a bucket full of tools, this is how you use them, this is what you do with them, go find out what the truth is. Because any truth that you can say is not going to be real, is not going to be true, because language belongs to mind. And mind, by nature, cannot grasp this final truth, because it's a step down from this truth. mind is within the self, but it's not the self. All right. Okay, so now he's talking. We've got a situation here where the teacher and student are chatting back and forth and asking questions and having a discussion. And the teacher is speaking at this point. And he says, loud speech in a stream of words, the efficiency in expounding or commenting upon the scriptures, erudition, these bring only little joyous material satisfaction to the scholar, but they are insufficient to bring about liberation. So it's very interesting that the writer is saying, because he's also said in the past that all tools are insufficient. If this realization is not is an effect without a cause, it's independent of all causes. So it's your practice isn't going to do it, your reading the scriptures isn't going to do it, your being a nice person isn't going to do it, your studying isn't going to do it. That that it's not something that's out there that needs to be acquired, because it's not that you're missing something that's the problem. It's a distance of attention as opposed to a distance of space, if you can say. It's something that's real, but we're looking out. Our general disposition is to look out through our five senses and to explore the world and everything through those five senses. They say that the truth is inward, that we have to take our gaze away from the five senses and turn around and look in on ourselves in order to see this nature, to have this understanding. And so nothing is to be acquired. It's not a structure of facts that you arrange in your mind. It's not a theses of arguments that you arrive at through reason or through logic. It's not a structure that you build through experience at all, is what he's saying. He's saying, so the study of the scriptures and being able to talk eloquently about them, that these are small little joys for the scholar, but their sum total of benefit is really, I hate to say unimportant, but at least not effective. It's not going to be the cause of your enlightenment, the cause of your being able to see. He says, without knowing the supreme reality, the study of the sastras is futile, and having known the supreme reality, the study of the shastras is equally futile. The labyrinth of words is a thick jungle which causes the mind to wander in its own confusion. Therefore, true seekers of Brahman should earnestly set about to experience the real nature of the self. For him who has been stung by the serpent of ignorance, the only remedy is the knowledge of Brahman. Of what use are the Vedas and the scriptures, the mantras and medicines to such a victim of poison? So it's an interesting argument that he's making here, an interesting thing to grasp, because it's a confusing argument, because he's saying that none of these things can bring you there, and so they're of no value. And once you've been there, these things also have no value. And yet, it's kind of like what the way Sri Ramakrishna describes it. He says, it's like a grocery list. You know, your wife gives you a grocery list, your husband gives you a grocery list to go to the grocery shop to buy the groceries. Well, once you've looked at the list, you don't need the list anymore. It's useless. And once you've gotten the groceries, you don't need them anymore. But the list made you aware, or brought about an awareness that made its own self unnecessary. So you can argue at some point it's necessary to have the scriptures, it's necessary to have the teachers, although people have had this realization without scriptures and without teachers. So it's really a hard thing to describe. But he says that it's still a worthwhile, it's the worthwhile investigation in this life, because the realization of it is, I mean, it has left everybody who has seen it speechless. Let's put it that way. So he says, a disease is not cured by merely repeating the name of the medicine without taking it. Similarly, without direct realization, none can be liberated by the mere utterance of Brahman. So he's saying that the teachings that are going to come here, this involves, you have to be committed to this investigation for it to be effective. That rote efforts are not going to do it. You know, that there are no magic utterances. And the reason he's saying this is because the experiment is, hello Gauri.
Hi.
The thing about this realization and this laboratory experiment that we're involved in, the reason that it's so hard, or the reason that it's such a challenge, is because it's your life that is actually under investigation. It's your nature that's under investigation. So for the experiment to work, you have to engage that. So it's not something you can do from 9 to 5 and then lay it down and go home. That these experiments have to do with the way that you live, the way that you think, the way that you approach yourself, the way that you approach the world around you. And so it's not something that you can casually decide, we'll just kind of poke out a little bit and see what happens. It's a certain investigation on your part to commit to the efforts to come to this understanding, come to this realization that you can't collect a bunch of facts about a bunch of different religions and be able to have a whiz-bang conversation about it. He says, you can do that, but you'll be just as lost as the person who doesn't know anything of any of those ideas. So don't set about in it that way. He says, without achieving the dissolution of the world of perceptions, now we're getting into it, and without realizing the truth of the self, how can one achieve full liberation by a mere repetition of the word Brahman? Surely it will result only in a wasteful effort of speech. So it's not, he's really just saying here, it's not something that you're going to know. And what happens is, in fact, he's going to warn us in another place too, that this idea that it exists somehow in knowledge, as an array of facts, will be a stumbling block. Because the real matter of the fact is, it's a negation of all of that. There's no I at the center of this wheel. There's no center for these spokes. You know, you are everywhere, and it's the fact that you think you are only here, and that you identify yourself with only here, that you cannot perceive properly the reality. Because this here is this here-ness cannot be, it can't be validated. You can't prove it. You know, that all of the information you're getting through the senses are not verifiable. You cannot know their essence. Because you just like in a dream, there seems to be an outside world or an inside world, and you're experiencing everything through the same senses within a dream. And yet, the fact of the dream is that it's all happening in your head, that there is no outside and inside, and that the information apparently coming through the senses is emanating only from you itself, and your mind is drawing the rest, imagining the rest. And so he's saying here that without achieving the dissolution of the world of perceptions, which is exactly that, if there's not an I, an ego, accumulating the knowledge coming through the five senses, then the outside world ceases to exist. One could say. Now, how do we bring that down into the room? How do we make that real? Vivekachudamani says, in this world of senses, this world of perceptions, no matter how far into it you dig, you're never going to arrive at an ultimate. That the more you investigate, the more mysteries become revealed. So for every answer that you get, there's going to be 3 new questions that arise. And that the nature of this world is exactly that it just keeps splitting. The closer you look, it just keeps splitting. There's always going to be one more particle that we have to discover. There's always going to have to be one more piece of the puzzle that's missing. Because it doesn't have an inherent existence. Like in a dream can manifest an infinite number of facts for investigation, but because they're being made up in real time within the world of the dream, you can't really find the answer. You just kind of keep running into more questions, more possibilities, more interesting ideas, more notions. So he's saying without achieving the dissolution of the world of perceptions, which means really the dissolution of an ego, the point of particular that is here. Being able to let go of that, and when the consciousness is able to let go of that particular, when that ego is able to be loosened enough for your sense of self to detach from this particular, that you'll see a whole new world, you'll see a whole new arrangement of things out there. So he says, without eliminating his enemies and without bringing the splendor of the whole kingdom under his sway, by merely repeating, I am the emperor, one cannot become an emperor. So that seems obvious, but he's saying again that this work that's being laid out, this path, that you prepare for this realization, it doesn't result in a realization necessarily, but it's a preparation for this realization to occur. That you have to do these things, it doesn't happen just by doing a series of actions without the involvement of yourself, your heart, your own place. That if you do these things just as a series of actions or in a materialistic, external sort of way, without involving the heart, without involving the self, that it's not going to work. No matter how much you do it, it's not going to happen. You're going to have to get the armies under control. You're going to have to bring the senses under control. You're going to have to bring the mind under control. And only by being the emperor are you the emperor. Not by simply saying, I'm the emperor. So it's a little bit of a distinction there.
So is it like, so you fulfill one desire and new desire will come in and as you investigate or as you progress?
Well, yes, in one sense. In one sense. In the other sense, really what it is that I who's needy is the one that has to be investigated. You see, that I that sees itself as incomplete, that I has to be investigated, not what that I wants, not the things that I might be interested in, but it's the I itself that has to be investigated. Who is desiring? That's the question in the scriptures. The scriptures are not saying, what do you see? They're not interested in the outside world. What does it look like? What does God feel like? What does God taste like? What does God sound like? The investigator says, who is it that's looking? Who is it that listens to my ears? Who is it that looks through my eyes? Who is it that feels my fingers, my toes? Who is this who's asking this question? The questions, the needs, the desires, they're not important. That's not what we're going after. That's what comprises the outside world. What we're looking after is, who is it that wants to know? Who is it that experiences a life? Who's the questioner? So that's what we're going after. We're going after that, that being. And one thing about this scripture, certainly Sankaracharya really drives his points home. He finds like 12 different ways of saying the same thing, and 12 scriptures in a row will say the same thing using a different thing each time to describe it. And I don't, of course, I'm not Sankaracharya by any stretch, so I've often wondered why in the world does he keep driving these things into the ground like this? You know, you read, especially when you're giving a class, you keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. You're like, let's get to it here. And part of it, I think, is that realization happens in an odd way. You know, it's like when you're a math person. Like my experience in math class is that teacher could sit there and tell me something 12 different ways. And you know, there's a period of time where you sort of get it so that you can do it rotely, but you don't get what you're doing. You don't understand the implications of it. It's not going to help you. You don't understand, you can't, like you're learning how to add 2 and 2. That's fine. But unless you actually understand what you're doing by adding 2 and 2, you're not going to be able to stand on that knowledge and build multiplication. You know, you see how that works? You have to grok the idea. You have to really understand the idea of addition in order then to relate it to the notion of multiplication. And if you've learned that, multiplication is just like of course, very easy. But if you don't understand addition properly, even though you can rotely do it because you've memorized all the important additions, you can't build on that one. And so he's saying very much the same thing here. It's like, okay, look, there's some things we have to understand, and I'm going to tell you like the same thing in like 15 different ways, in the hopes that at the end of it tonight, when you're laying in bed and kind of wondering, what in the world? Oh my God, I get it. You'll have that aha moment, because that's the nature of realization. Realization, you don't learn anything new. Nothing changes at all. It's just all of a sudden, boom. Oh my God, I get it, you know. And it wasn't the result of anything. It's that mysterious process. Who knew what it was when I learned addition? What was it that changed? I hadn't had any more information given to me. I had just sat there and kind of ruminated over the stuff that was in my head, and at just some magic moment, enough things came together where I comprehended this thing. So that's kind of what he's undergoing here. So he says, a treasure hidden deep below, under the earth, can be found only when the exact site is known. Excavations carried out and the earth, stones, etc. covering it are removed, never come out merely by calling its name. Similarly, the pure truth of the self, hidden by this illusion of Maya, this world, and its effects, can be attained through the instructions of one who is a knower of Brahman, followed by reflection, meditation, etc. But never can the self emerge and manifest itself by repeating perverted reasoning. Okay, so really any kind of reasoning is perverted. Now you say, how is that possible? Because reasoning in our situation requires an infinite amount of assumption. Right? We have a lot of assumption, and the scriptures say, or allude to the idea that our first wrong assumption is that we exist separate and apart from everything else. And so we accept that wrong assumption that we are separate and apart from everything else, and we construct our world from that, and we learn to live in our world according to that. But the scriptures say that the truth of the matter is that you are not separate and apart from everything else. As a matter of fact, you are everything else, that you are this oneness. And so any reasoning that you do from the perspective that you're separate and apart from everything else is perverted reasoning. You're not going to get a right outcome, a true outcome, because there's a wrong assumption to begin with. And so on it goes from there. These conversations can get very fun, actually, when you start talking about them. There are implications about it, especially on the philosophical level. But he's also saying that's not going to get you there either. You'll enjoy it. You'll have a lot of fun. It's very cool to do, but that's not part of. That's not going to solve the problem. Therefore, the wise seeker should, as in the case of illness, etc., strive hard by every means at his disposal to be free from the bondage of repeated births and deaths. Okay. So he's saying the only reasonable outcome here is pretend that you're mortally ill, that you've got a terrible disease that's ending everything for you, and with the same attitude and the same seriousness that you would approach that problem by seeking any means of treatment possible, by researching other means of treatment, cures, talking to people about people they know that have gotten better, Now with that same seriousness, that same attitude, that's the attitude necessary for undertaking this problem. That anything less than that isn't going to, the realization isn't going to happen. That it takes that kind of seriousness within someone's self. Now that doesn't mean if you don't have it, you just go away. That means you kind of hang out and sort of try and develop it, or get curious enough for it to happen.
So why is it so difficult to understand and to realize?
Yeah, that's an answer. Most of these questions we have to ask ourselves. But this one, Ramakrishna gives a great example. He says, if you're trying to wake somebody up who's actually sleeping, it's not difficult. But if you're trying to wake up somebody who's pretending to sleep, it's impossible. And so he says that in our delusion, we like it. We like what's going on. We like being what we are. We like our families, we like the world the way it is, we like our cars, we like our sense of self, our sense of power. We're kind of intoxicated with this environment. We sort of enjoy seeing the world as we see the world. And so for us to see a world that literally undoes all of that and presents to us a truth and a realization that is far beyond all of that, we have to let go of all of this wrong thinking. It's not that it's hard to let go of this wrong thinking, it's that we don't want to let go.
But we are programmed into it. We've been programmed since birth.
Yeah, most definitely. And we've programmed ourselves right along with it, right? I mean, those moments when these questions pop up and you're just like, you just ignore it, right? I mean, the fact that all of us are going to die, right? That's something that's absolutely true, absolutely not a theory in any way, matter of shape. It's real. And if you think about that with a sane mind, that becomes problem number one in your life. You're like, well, all of this is just going to end. Like, my whole family's going to go away, all of my wealth is going to go away, all of my experiences are going to go away, everything's going to disappear. How do we deal with that? By not dealing with it, right? In our culture, we've managed to hide death almost 100%. It happens, it always happens somewhere else. If somebody's dying, they're whisked away to a hospital, to a solitary place. When they die, their body's whisked down to the back rooms, out of view, out of sight. They do something to it. If the family wants to have a wake, it goes to the wake, and then immediately it's buried and gone. It's like everything's kept out of sight. Everything for the living is kept very pleasant and very much, things going on just fine. You know, yes, we buried 1 million people today, no worries, life is going on. And so we don't contemplate death. We don't think about this idea very much because we don't have a solution for it. We don't have a way of dealing with it. You know, we don't know what it is. We don't have any understanding about it. And yet, if you read through our daily ongoings, it's not a big deal to us. We can go through a whole day without contemplating it, without thinking about it. And so it's kind of like that. That's why it's so difficult. One, because we just ignore it. We're very comfortable with our assumptions and with the way things are going on. It's not perfect, we know that. It has serious consequences, we know that. But you know, it's good enough. And so we go on. So that's why it's difficult. Because we like it, and we don't want to let go of it. You don't want to, you know, especially in this situation, because the truth being posited is not an experience, it's something completely other. And we don't even have a place to put that. We don't even have a pocket to put that in. You're like, what does that mean? And then somebody's telling you, you have to let go of everything that you know and accept something that I can't tell you, that I can't describe to you. It's on a pure act of faith, as it were. You know, that you were, I remember I went blackwater rafting. Did I tell you that story? I went blackwater rafting in New Zealand. Blackwater rafting is rafting in an underground river. And it's pitch black, and we're in inner tubes and rafting this underground river. We had to climb into a cave, and at one point in this thing, we all had these hard hats on with this little 40-watt bulb. And a lot of times that 40-watt bulb's not hitting anything. So even though you've got a light, it's still as dark as can be to you because it's not reflecting off of anything. And there was one point where the river goes off a waterfall underground. And our two guides, you know, we all stopped, there's a big pool at the top, and then it spilled over down. And you didn't know how far it went down. When you looked with your little 30-watt little bulb, it didn't reflect off of anything at the bottom. And so we all had to line up one at a time. They made you bend over real tight, and they would squeegee the inner tube over your butt, you know, so that you were bent over with your inner tube, your butt sticking through the inner tube. And then they would give you a big heave off of this cliff backwards. And you would fall, it turned out to be about 15 feet. You would fall, boom, and land in the water butt first on your inner tube, and it was all fine and all fun. But that leap, you couldn't see where you were going. You didn't know it was coming. And I could tell you, everything in you would rather just stay where you are. I'll just stay right here, thanks. I don't want to be pushed backwards into the dark, into the abyss like that. And so this experience is somewhat like that.
So how do you felt there?
Yeah.
And then how you felt?
Well, as soon as you hit the water, you're relieved. That's
You
split few
landed
seconds.
somewhere.
Yeah, that few seconds when you're not hitting anything, you're kind of like, oh my God. But the worst is when you're standing at the top and you know they're going to push you, and you're just not quite ready to be pushed, which is why they push you, because nobody.
But you felt very good when you...
Oh yeah, when you get to the bottom, you
Yeah.
pushed into a big bunch of water, it's no problem at all, you're in an inner tube. And everybody else is down there now with their little lights bobbing. So, yeah, so he's saying, wake up to the real condition here. Wake up to your real situation in the universe. Become conscious of things that may not seem so sane to be conscious of, you know. It's like that same idea of become aware. Like this last week we had a meteor, or what do they call that, an asteroid, come closer to us than the moon. Did you guys read that?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 2 days ago or something. They didn't even know it was coming.
Yeah, the sky, they show us
Yeah,
in the TV.
yeah. So it was a giant asteroid. If it had hit us, you know, it could have done us in. It came closer to us than the moon. Now, that's something that could keep you up at night, because we're hurling through unknown space, you know, at unfathomable speeds, completely unprotected from anything else that might be running around out there. And if you begin thinking about even these simple, obvious things, you'd go crazy, right? And so our mind is very adept at maintaining a sense of normalcy in a situation that really doesn't have any normalcy, that you're not guaranteed anything. But our mind is very well equipped to make non-guarantees, make assumptions. Well, yesterday was fine, today will be fine. You know? And really there's no other evidence for that. And so in our spiritual life, they're just saying, really become aware, that's all. Look at all these things. Look at this story. Start paying attention to what you're seeing in the way that you are. You know, you're inhabiting a body that has changed so radically through the course of your life, and yet your sense of I has remained the same. How is that possible? What does that mean? You know,
Because change is happening slowly.
yeah, but what is it that's maintaining the sense of I? What is the thing that is steady within the constantly changing body? What is the thing that's not changing? And how is it being held in a position of non-changing? You know, how is a sexless 3-year-old boy now a 40-year-old married man? How does that sense of I maintain? Unchanged. You know, through all of those years and through all of those experiences, through all of those changes. You know, the mind itself changes from day to day, and yet it carries the same sense of I with it from day to day, even though everything changes. You know, the guy that grew up in a small farm in Iowa is now a postdoc at Stanford, leading a national corporation.
You're giving him ideas. He's from Stanford.
Yes, I know. So it's the same, but see, that person has, his sense of I has been maintained through a radically changing environment.
Yeah, is that I the ego or something else?
Well, that's what we're investigating.
Okay.
That's exactly the answer we're trying to find. How do we figure out who it is that's experiencing all of these things? And how is he being transported unchanged through this environment, you know, through this experience? How can a mind, if you are the mind, if the mind actually is you, how can a mind be an observer of itself? How can it constantly abstract itself out as the third person over and over and over and over again and always be the watcher? You know, how is it possible? So anyway, that's the questions we're going to go. He says, the questions you've raised today are excellent, accepted by well-versed in the scriptures, aphoristic, full of hidden meaning and such, that are fit to be known by all seekers. Listen attentively, O learned one, to what I shall now tell you. Listening to it, you shall be liberated completely from the bondage of worldly existence. I wish I could just stop there. Okay, commercials come on. Stay tuned next time. So he says, the first step to liberation is the complete detachment from impermanent things. Then follow calmness, self-control, forbearance, and complete renunciation of all selfish action.
That's a lot.
That's the first step.
That's the whole that's a lot together in 2 sentences.
Yes, indeed. That's the first step. And yeah, Ramakrishna and the scriptures, they all say, okay, what do we have to do here? He says, well, look for that which does not change. Try and find that which does not change. Ramakrishna says, that which does not change alone is real. Everything that changes is unreal. And you think about that, we talk about that extensively, and yet we still don't seem to get it. But you can take anything in your hands, you know, and give it 1,000 years, it'll be something completely different. You know, take a tree, you know, you take a seed, then it becomes this giant tree, and the tree falls over, it becomes a trunk, and then it rots and becomes soil. And then that soil gets compressed and it turns into coal, and then a coal gets even more compressed and suddenly a diamond. And so it's what was real? Was the diamond real, or was the tree real, or was the seed real, or what was the nature of this thing that is constantly changing? What is that? You know, when a person dies and you look at the corpse, I mean, instantly someone you love, something you wanted to lay next to, something you wanted to caress, and something you wanted to embrace, is now this thing that you don't want to be anywhere near it. Just like that. You know, what was real? It's still the body. You know, it's still laying there. What's missing from it? What is that thing that makes a body in one snap go from desirable to reprehensible? What happened there? What went away? What changed? Or what didn't change? You know. So the scriptures say our first step is to look at what changes. And those things that change, reject them as unreal. They're not the thing itself. So keep looking. So, you know where this is going, right? To my story with Swami Prabhupada. When I first read this in the scriptures, I was very excited. I was like, well, that's easy. I can tell what changes and what doesn't change. And so I went up by special appointment to the shrine and sat there by myself for an hour and a half and just started contemplating things, like taking them off. Oh, no, okay, nope, nope. Okay, so I'm changing 0, changing 432 at this moment. So, you know, there's nothing that doesn't change. How? So I went to the dinner table with Swami Prabhupada and I told him, I said, Maharaj, I thought this was going to be really simple. I thought finally I had something concrete to work with here, and I can't think of anything that doesn't change. What is he talking about? And Maharaj gave me a very important thing. It was the obvious, but not so obvious. He said, well, who was it that was looking for something that didn't change? And I thought for a second, I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. He's like, that watcher, that observer, that witness within the self does not change, has never changed, and is eternal. Identify with that as yourself, and not with the changing body and the changing things of the world around you. And that will bring about liberation. To know that that is what you are, that unchanging observer, and not the thing that you're observing. You're observing a mind, you're observing a body, you're observing senses, but you are not those things. You are the witness. You know, eternal and ever free. And it's the same witness within every person. So that's step number 1, is just to wake up to the things that are changing. Pay attention to that which does not change. Do not identify yourself, your being. Don't identify yourself with things that change. Identify yourself with this unchanging witness. That's the first step. And the more you're able to do that, the more you're able to kind of become aware of that. Patience follows. Kindness follows. Self-control follows. Complete renunciation of all selfish action begins to follow. Those are natural results of properly identifying yourself with this unchanging nature. And we're going to stop there, but later we'll find the nature of the self. That's going to be part of the interest of the scriptures. What is the nature of this unchanging self? And that's where this idea of Satchitananda comes in. Satchitananda meaning intelligence, bliss, and existence. Those are the three qualities of a thing that has no qualities. So your nature is love or bliss, Ananda. Your nature is intelligence, Chit. And your nature is existence, I am. That is Sat. So you'll find that those 3 elements are your nature. And that freedom involves letting those 3 things emanate with no attachment, with no confusion with the changing things, the changing world. That's the only way you can love fully and properly. It's the only way you can be fully intelligent. It's the only way you can be fully present. All of the other things cause ignorance. identifying with changing things causes ignorance. So that is the Vivekachudamani. Up to verse 70. Remember that? Verse 70 is where we stopped. All right. Any questions or concerns or points of obvious error? Any interesting ideas that occur to you?
We just keep working at it. That's all.
Yeah, we just keep exposing ourselves to it.
We just keep on going. We come back to zero, and then we find we haven't progressed very far, then back we start again.
Yeah,
Because the world keeps us involved.
well, yeah, it's hard to know because you're inside the vehicle. And it's hard to know how much has changed, you know. But the changes are subtle but radical over time. You know, they definitely are. But by keeping the problem in front of you, we come to a solution eventually. What's amazing is how hard it is to just pay attention to something. And Vivekananda says that that's really the only tool you need to sort this problem out, is the ability to concentrate, the ability to hold on to a single idea until you let go of it, not until you forget about it, but until you let go of it. And that's the problem. That's this idea of Maya. That's the thing that makes this practice so difficult, is that we're used to following the mind around. We're not used to driving the mind. We're accustomed to following the senses around. They smell a flower, we go looking for the flower. We feel a tinge of hunger, we go looking for food. You know, so we're accustomed to following our senses, not driving our senses. And so that ability to concentrate, that ability to focus, that ability to cut off these changing things from the mind is necessary in order to be able to focus enough to stick with the problem until it's solved. And so that's part of what so much of our practice is about, is simply getting the tool in working order so that we can use it to find the truth. Teach ourselves how to focus, teach ourselves how to concentrate, teach ourselves how to deny the attention of the senses that they're demanding, to refuse the identity with the body and its needs, so that we become in charge, not the body in charge. So that we become in charge, not a wandering mind that's in charge. So that's the hard part, is fixing up the tools that have laid rusting in the shed for 50 years, and to try to get them into working order so that we can fix this problem.